So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to our 16th HHL Expert Talk. First of all, I'm very excited to see many familiar faces here tonight, and most importantly, I hope you've all been safe and sound and you've been coping well during these rather difficult and turbulent times. For those of you who are tuning in for the very first time tonight, I'd like to give you a very brief overview of what the HHL Expert Talk is and why exactly we're doing this. It is a virtual talk series with which HHL aims to address latest key topics in research to broaden a knowledge transfer on current social, economic, and political topics. And all of these talks are led by HHL experts. To briefly introduce myself, my name is Sigrid Fischer, and I study journalism and psychology at Indiana University in the US and continued with a Master's of Science in Performance Psychology at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland, where I also worked later on in my career. At HHL, I'm now responsible, amongst other things, for our alumni network, and as part of this, I'm delighted to be moderating the HHL Expert Talk series. Before we're heading into tonight's talk, I'd like to give you a brief overview of HHL's most important facts and figures. As some of you may already know, HHL was founded more than 120 years ago in Leipzig, Germany. It is our mission to educate entrepreneurial, responsible, and effective business leaders through outstanding teaching, research, and practice. We're driven by excellence to benefit our students, stakeholder, and society. So where exactly are we today? Today, we have more than 700 students within our 5 programs. And these 5 programs are our full-time and part-time MSc, our full-time and part-time MBA, as well as our PhD program. We're proud to have more than 60 nations represented within our student body and to have an active network of more than 3,000 alumni. As an entrepreneurial-minded university, we're particularly proud that more than 350 startups, which created already more than 40,000 jobs by now, were founded or co-founded by HHL alumni. We're also happy to have strong bonds to more than 130 partner universities around the globe. It is now my great pleasure to introduce you to our expert for tonight, our Dean, Professor Dr. Stephan Stubner. Professor Dr. Stephan Stubner, as I already said, is the Dean of HHL Leipzig Graduate School of Management and also the chairholder of the Porsche Chair of Strategic Management and Digital Entrepreneurship. He obtained his doctoral degree from Friedrich-Alexander-University, Erlangen-Nuremberg. As one of the co-founders of Ciao.com and Trivago, he gained extensive entrepreneurial experience and continues to be active as a dedicated business angel. His professional experience includes several years at Siemens as well as at the Boston Consulting Group. Professor Stubner researches and teaches in the fields of entrepreneurship, strategy, and family business, and his research has been published in over 30 publications. He will be speaking about the topic, the future of business schools, tonight. Subsequent to his talk, we will have a Q&A session. We'd be delighted if you could type in all the questions you may be having into the chat, and we will go through them in due course. It is now my pleasure to hand over to Stephan. Enjoy tonight.
Thank you, Sigrid, for the kind introduction. From my side, also a very warm welcome to tonight's session. Let me start with a quick story. It was back in the end of March 1998 when a young aspiring graduate student with his uncle drove 500 kilometers with a truck to relocate from Munich to Leipzig. And in the very first night, who had never been in Leipzig before, in the city center, then went into the Barfußgässchen to grab a quick dinner together with his uncle, and then on the next table sat, and of course I had been doing my research, the then Dean of HHL, Professor Gerd Asmus. And if anybody would be an expert on a topic today, it would be him, and I'm very delighted, excited, and a little bit terrified, dear Gerd, that you have been joining us today. Gerd Asmus took a leave from Amos Tuck School, one of the leading business schools in the world, to actually become Dean of HHL. And I'm very happy to have you with us today, as many other names that I'm seeing here, many other people who do have quite a background in the field of higher education. Now, what makes me allegedly an expert to talk about the future of business schools, a grand topic this evening? There are two things that come together, I guess, where I have at least some background. The first one is when I became dean myself 5 years ago, I understood very quickly that the job is totally different to what I have been doing before, being a professor and a shareholder. And I dug very deep into the literature about what is a business school dean, what's he doing, etc., etc. And that time I first got a understanding that the world of business schools is quite complex. And in the past 5 years, with a very specific European and German background and context, of course, the whole team and myself have learned a lot of the ropes to jump over in this market. The second is that in these 5 years, we have run through 2 strategy processes, one back in 2017 and one very, very recently last year. And in that time, a team of dedicated colleagues and myself spent basically almost a year to do a lot of analysis on the market for higher education, higher business education, including the study of material that was available, both scholarly articles, but also more practitioner related studies from Financial Times, World Economic Forum, etc. And in addition, we had a lot of conversations and discussions, not only on the German and European level, but also on an international level with dear competitors, with customers in terms of students, but as well with corporations and of course a lot of stakeholders of HHL. So these efforts actually led to a rather broad understanding, or at least a belief of where this business school market could develop to and what the future might hold for business schools. And I'm gonna lead you a little bit through this process, and I invite you to do this journey with me over the next hour or so. And please, whenever you feel that you have a contraposition or another perception, or you want to add some own experience, please feel invited to post these questions. I think the easiest way, Sigrid, would be to type it in the chat, and then Sigrid will bring it up and I will instantly address it where appropriate, of course. Now, let me first start, and I am a strategy professor by education. Let me start with a typical strategy process, which normally starts with an external analysis. So what's happening in the market? And in the market, what I've seen is that there are a couple of major developments, let's just call them trends, that have an effect on what we as business schools actually encounter as challenges and opportunities. The first one, from a macro perspective, would be developments in a corporate, but also in a society-oriented environment. And one buzzword that jumps to mind here is what you can read in newspapers and magazines and articles, what you get as feedback from HR departments and personnel developments and organizations is lifelong learning. Lifelong learning meaning you don't study once and then you have a job for life. Like I was doomed to stay my life with Siemens AG because my dad worked there all his life, my aunt, my uncle, my grandma. I started my career there. My very first 5 years were with Siemens. So I was actually doomed for a Siemens corporate career. But that has changed these days. You cannot assume to start with one company anymore and then stay with it until you retire. But the development goes more into a what some call the brand me.inc. So you and your resource that you provide to organization organizations becomes an own corporation if you want so, and you have to be up to date with what you know and what your competencies are to be needed in the job market, in the market for you yourself as a resource. And that only is only possible if you embrace lifelong learning as an attitude, but also, of course, as a process. Also, what we see from corporations that understand, because the environment is changing, we have to educate and re-educate our employees. The content and the competencies that you develop and that organizations and individuals require from any learning offerings are much more important, or become much more important over time than the mere diploma. Still, if I'm looking now specifically at the German market, everybody wants to have diplomas and certificates in her HR file. There are studies that with a doctorate, you have a higher likelihood, statistically speaking, to become a board member in a big corporation. The MBA, at last, if it's from one of the top 10 schools, also has a major impact. So of course, people continue to collect those certificates and diplomas, but in a corporate setting, the requirement becomes less and less important, but people are more, or organizations are more looking towards what real competencies does that person have. And specifically when they then embark into lifelong learning, and most business schools offer executive education to organizations when it comes to lifelong learning, you're looking at nuggets of competency that you want to transmit, and not a 1-year, 2-year diploma that you want to offer your employees. So that would be one or two drivers why we believe that lifelong learning will not only be a buzzword also for the years to come, but also something very important. And a lot of the context and topics that I'm bringing up shortly flow directly into that lifelong learning aspect. The second major trend is technological. We have seen two dimensions of that bear some importance for us as business schools. The first one is automation. Second one would be machine learning and artificial intelligence. That's no news, but we haven't really embraced it yet. The understanding that with increasing automation, with the increasing implementation of AI, and if you talk AI today, this goes from machine learning, simple, stupid algorithms, to the endeavor to actually reach the point of singularity being the moment when AI becomes self-conscious. So what you see in these science fiction movies. And all of that has an effect that it replaces traditional jobs. Now, in a positive perspective, you could say, wow, that opens up possibilities because it creates new jobs, and it helps us to actually move away from the old chain belt oriented work where you just, you deliver your manual labor, to really what humans want to be, developing themselves, be creative, etc. Like Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba, a couple of years mentioned in a keynote speech at the World Economic Forum, where he said, we're all going to be replaced. So we have to ask ourselves as humans, where is our value add in a couple of years when automation, when machine learning, when AI will ultimately replace most of our jobs. On the positive side again, or no, on the effect on higher education is jobs are changing. Jobs are changing, job requirements are changing. We're working together with a big organization. They tell us within the next 5 years, we believe that 80% of the jobs that we have in our organization will not be there anymore, driven because of these effects. And they have a dire need to re-educate their workforce. And that's where business schools come in, of course, again. The second aspect, or the second trend from a technological perspective, would be the digitization with respect to business schools. Why digitization? And where's the difference to automation and machine learning AI? Digitization means the move from a physical value chain to a digitized value chain with all its pros and cons, but especially for business schools, our way of delivery. We're moving away step by step, and of course, with the external shock of the pandemic, much faster than we had expected it to develop 5 years ago. We're moving away from the classical lecture room setting. We have the students and the lecturer in a room to a more or less digitized delivery, mode of delivery, so to say. Those two drivers now, from the institutional side, corporations, technological side, they now meet a third major driver. And the Keen strategy scholar knows there are actually 5 macro forces, but I focus only on 3 here. The societal aspect. We have lost at large we have lost the ability to focus and concentrate. The attention span of students has gone down. We are in a, let me call it, TikTok era. TikTok, for those of you who don't know it, it's a nice app. You can waste hours and hours on short, I think maximum 3-minute videos. And the attention span of the consumers of education is also decreasing. I was reminded of it today when I looked at the latest Focus. Focus is a German business magazine. I hadn't read it for a long time. I opened it and it basically looked like the internet. Very short, picture-supported, headline-based messages. A full magazine of very short articles, Twitter tweets, I would say. And that is also a resemblance of that the attention span of people is reducing, and people don't have the possibility to really let new information sink in anymore. At large and as a development. Of course, there are exceptions, but what does it mean for business schools? We have to adapt our way of teaching. Whereas I would say, if you were a very good professor, in the past, you would say 20, 30 minutes of content and then give them a break or let them exercise, let them develop the competency and apply it. The question is, will my students actually listen to me for 30 minutes and then start applying? Or, and I had that before the pandemic already, you already all the time have these WhatsApp pings, ping, ping, ping. People are doing 2, 3 things at the same time, multitasking, and multitasking, several studies show actually doesn't work. So this ability to focus is decreasing, unfortunately. Furthermore, you have this always on attitude, always on. You have a mobile device, you're looking at your mobile device. I'm no stranger to that. I'm shocked every week when I get the time overview of how much time, how many hours and days during a day I looked at my mobile phone. And that is something that we also see with our students developing further and further. What does it mean? It means that the behavior of our students changes, and we as business schools have to adapt to that, to make it easy for them to actually get access to our offerings and to bundle it in a way that it's easy for them to grasp and to remember and to be hooked in. So let's say this term of edutainment becomes much more important than it might have been in the past. I mean, we're still using the term lectures, where traditionally a professor stands in front of a class and lectures out of a book. And I had some of those courses myself. Furthermore, students have an increasing tendency to look for return on their investment. When I started this academic career, the perception was that people were awestruck to just be allowed to sit in a room with a professor and benefit from his or her wisdom. Whereas today, in a world where there's much more transparency, much more digitization, a much bigger feedback culture, that said, not a constructive feedback necessarily where you interact with a personality, but where you post a review on Yelp or Google or on I don't know what platform. In this area, we see that students are more and more demanding, more and more craving, because they have the possibility to benchmark, to give instant feedback and double check the feedback of others. So we have to be aware of that there is less commitment. People will not just stay with you because they once signed up, but students want to have continuous reapproval that they made the right choice. And when we're looking at a future where we have more of those shorter competency related offerings, not only the 1-2 year programs, you have to be aware of that in the resale cycle. The resale cycle happens much faster. And if you don't perform in these 1 to 3 months that you have for a competency development course for one competency only, you will not have that student coming back to you because she will just move somewhere else. And we see that Sigrid, being our head of alumni relations for many years, we see that also in our alums. They, of course, are connected to us out of an emotional bond and the experience of a world-class education. But they're very, very critically assessing when they come into our executive education programs if the value it holds is competitive in the market. And if not, they just move away. So there's less commitment that we can see in general. Now, if we move a little bit on a more industry-related discussion. So this was some of the major trends that we have identified. If you're looking at our competitive environment.
One interruption, and we have 2 questions already
yes,
to the topics that you've already addressed. And maybe we start with the 2 questions and then you go ahead with the industry related. The first question was, do you think that books are still relevant on an educational level? Should we prescribe books for our students? What's your opinion on that?
Thanks, Calvin. And it goes a little bit together with Kai's question. I believe that books are very relevant, but we have to find a way to motivate our students to start reading books. And I see it in our library as well. Our library is almost all digital. And it is different, at least for me, it's different to read a book on an iPad compared to really having a book in front of you. And I believe there's a lot of value in books, but again, it needs attention span, it needs energy, it needs the possibility to really engage. Yeah, I see the books behind you, Kevin. It needs energy. And together with Kai's question, if I may jump over here, here I can only tell you about my experience. I developed 2 courses in the past 5 years, based on the feedback that we get from students and the perception that they don't have time anymore. Like studying at HHL, like at any other business school, is very time consuming. So they don't have time to actually read. They tell me, you know what, I have to deliver a paper today and tomorrow, then I have a group work, then I have an exam, then I have a presentation. I just don't have time. I try to survive. I do what is necessary to survive, but I don't really delve into deep reading. So I developed 2 courses. In one course, I made a reading list. I had a 12-week time span, and I told them there are 10 books and 10 articles, and we're going to read about them over time. And we're going to discuss them. The students signed up for the course, and after 2 sessions, they started quitting. They hated it. Because they just didn't, I don't know why, but they didn't have the time. So yes, should we, as an educator, my strong belief is we should provide the time to reflect, to think. We should provide the time to actually delve deep into a topic. But the market reality is that at least in a business school setting, and I've discussed this with a couple of other deans from European universities, in a business school setting, it at the moment doesn't really work. Yes, the educational aspiration is there, but I have not yet found a way to really instill this into people, except for some students who embrace something like that. And then if I offer something that my students don't want as a private business school, I'm in trouble, because they want their money back, and they will tell others, don't go and study there, because you don't learn anything. You have to, develop competency yourself, and you have to read books. You can read books at home. You don't need to have to pay a business school for that. And then for private business school, it becomes a little bit difficult. If you're a state business school, and there are fine state business schools, state funded, then you can take that leap and actually tell your students, you do it or not, you give me a bad review, I don't care. You're stuck with me.
Do you think that the shortening of attention span has an implication on the quality that is being delivered? Somebody was asking, especially on the quality of scientific papers being made by students.
Quality by students, I would have to say. We've seen an increasing quality by scholars, so PhD students. When we moved in Germany away from books to paper-based publishing, and there's a lot to say against paper-based publishing, but it forces students to really think through the argumentation, PhD students, because there will be somebody else who doesn't know you to evaluate your paper. So you have to be really crystal clear in your argumentation. Your data has to be exact, because there's no brownie bonus because somebody likes you or knows you. Students, it's a different beast. And this is a European perception. Very personally, I find one of the most terrible developments in higher education in Europe was the introduction of the Bologna Process as it has been implemented. Bologna Process means that you want to make all the European bachelor degrees comparable. So it is, at least for Germany, when you started studying back in the 90s, you came from school where you have your clear schedule. Monday at 8 o'clock you start, Friday at 4 o'clock you stop, you have your homework, etc., you have exams. And while the idea was good, to provide a path that you can really manage, that you spread exams away from just 1 week of killer exams at the end throughout collecting credits over time. The intention was good, but in Germany, what happened when you started studying at a university back in the 90s, you were basically lost. Before that, you had a timetable. Before that, somebody told you where to be at 8 o'clock and what to learn, etc. And then you came to university, and I know many people, me including, the first 2 terms, I had no clue what's going on. I tried desperately tried to survive, to know what courses should I actually be taking. And while that experience was somewhat, at that time, was not that good, it helped actually to develop. It helped to not become streamlined. And you had the possibility. I had 1 term free. There was 1 term, I took 1 course, the rest I worked and partied. And, while in the orientation with my parents, it might have been difficult. Looking back, that's something that I can recommend to everybody, to just, get the time to somehow develop and think. Today, with the Bologna Process, you end school Friday at 3 in your timetable, and Monday you start with a new timetable at 8 o'clock, because the university is giving you the timetable. And you're running through, and all you're doing is same as at school. You're trying to learn for your exam, and then forget to make room for the next learning experience. And then people come to us. And I would say not the stupidest and least performing bachelor graduates and master graduates come to us. And the first weeks and the first months are a very frustrating experience for everybody. So, for example, when I make a course in the first week of the MSc program, we typically pose a very open question. Like, you remember Deepwater Horizon, like the oil rig that exploded. And we give our students in the first week, we give an assignment. You're the CEO of Deepwater Horizon. Your chairman just called you tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. You have to present what's going on. And the students are like, okay, what does it mean? Could you please tell me what the question is? Could you please tell me what is a comparable ideal solution? Can you tell me what is totally expected? No, I can't. Welcome to real life. That's what's going to happen in the job. Somebody's calling you, wants to talk to you tomorrow, is very blurry about what the expectations are. Now you need to run. And it's very frustrating for many of our students because they need, and of course at HHL, we equip them with all the tools to master that challenge. But they, sometimes for the very first time, they have to challenge a complex problem and try to make sense of it in a very short time frame to come up with something to talk about with your recipient. And that has worsened over the past couple of years. So, and now coming to the answer or to the specific question, many students come to us and I experience they have never had to write a scientific paper. They just have no idea how to write a scientific paper. The courses that you had 10 years, 20 years ago on scientific work, paper writing, or actually writing papers during bachelor's or master's is an art that has to a large extent been lost. So they have to relearn or learn it when they come to us. Is the scientific quality worse? On average, no, but it takes much more time and much more effort for the lecturers and the tutors and the mentors to actually explain what is expected because there is no experience in many cases. Okay. Thank you very much for the questions. Love the questions. Of course, you're invited to rebuttal my answers here. If not, let's move over to the competitive environment. And there's a nifty tool called Porter 5 Forces. Many strategists make fun of it. I still love the tool. Not only because Michael Porter is an honorary doctorate of HHL, but because in so many decades, I again and again have seen the power of it. And please allow me to use this old dusty tool. The 5 forces, I wanted to start with substitutes. Substitutes is a big issue in business schools. Substitutes is when you get what you want from a business school somewhere else, where it's not a business school. And then the question is, what do you want? What do you want from a business school? Why do you go to a business school? And there are different value sets that students are typically looking for. It might be the degree, the piece of paper. It might be the brand name, like Harvard, Chicago. You go there very often for the brand, the community and network. And some actually go there for the learning. And there are substitutes for all of these different possibilities. Let's just focus on learning here. For many years now, MOOCs have been available. Massive online learning systems. So basically you have a webinar or you have a YouTube-based course, high-class speakers, it's for free, thousands of people join, thousands of people actually quit again. And that's a problem with MOOCs. The rate of people who start a MOOC compared to those who actually finish it is minuscule because it's difficult for somebody and it takes discipline and attention span to actually go through with it. You could learn all the know-how, the knowledge that you learn at HHL or any other business school. I would dare to say you can learn from a good MOOC, from a book, from an app, from articles. You can learn it somewhere else, you know, without us trying to spoon feed it to students. But even that you could get for free somewhere else. But we have seen that very often students don't feel too comfortable. There are those cases, there are many cases, of course, but in relation it's small. There are cases of people who actually enjoy this type of learning, but many think they want to start and then drop out again. So substitutes is actually, from my perspective, not the real problem because it caters to a different type of target group.
1 second, Stefan, maybe you want to explain again what a MOOC is, just the wording again, just so that everybody's on the same page here.
A MOOC is a massive open online course.
Perfect, thank you.
So it's massive. It means it's a real course. It's big. It's open for the public. Thousands of people can join. It's open. It's for free typically. It's online and it's a course.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks for asking. Is the MOOC just a modern form of textbook? Could be. That depends. I mean, there are better and worse MOOCs. And it could be sometimes it's just a better form of a textbook. Yeah, even I mean MOOCs could be with a person being videotaped. It could be drawings. I know a very good strategy professor who actually drew his book into a little comic. It's also something you can do, but it can also be more quasi-interactive, where you bring in questions and fake discussions. New entrants, that's something interesting. New entrants into the market, that is massive. We have a development that we can see of upward moving, of downward moving, of new players in the market. So it's getting crowded. New players, corporate universities. In the past years, there has been a stream again of corporate universities, meaning companies building up their own education centers. Has been a trend in the 70s, 80s, then it was a little bit quiet, and now it's coming back again. The big consulting companies are building their corporate universities like McKinsey or KPMG under the hypothesis, if I consult them, I can actually teach them how to implement my recommendations, and it works quite fine for them. There are a lot of education players, edtech players. So you have, just to name a few, Masterplan, Masterclass, Lingoda, Babbel for languages, Jot, etc., etc. A lot of people, a lot of startups trying to revolutionize education and also higher education that are coming through technology enabling approaches. And then you have an upward and downward moving. Upward moving means that let's say third tier, fourth tier schools are moving upwards or are changing the field. In Germany, we have the so-called Fachhochschulen. It's not a university, you can't do your PhD there. It's more practice oriented, but less academic typically. And they're moving into the field of master programs. And some of them do this very, very good. Not the majority, but some of them are becoming real reasonable competitors. And you have a downward moving of the first tier business schools that are offering for free or cheaper, like the big European business schools are offering online programs for cheaper, modularized programs for cheaper. So the market becomes very, very mixed and mingled. The big brand names try to take away a market from the third tier. The third tier try to offer something and take away market from the first tiers. In between, it's mixed up, so it is really becoming crowded. And in such an environment.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Sorry, just one question. If you keep you lovely explained how it's getting more competitive, the landscape is changing, and obviously the workforce is changing as well. How is it possible as a business school, as traditional as HHL and as super competitive, to stay as competitive as it has been, to be able to fight with those players that, obviously come from up and down and left and right? How is that possible?
If you allow me, I would I would take that question up in the very end.
Okay.
Because of course all these rantings lead to the understanding that we as HHL have and what the path forward will be for us. So it's not forgotten, but I think it fits better after a couple of other aspects that I wanted to raise. The first one I wanted to raise is bargaining power of suppliers. So who are suppliers at a business school? It is, of course, everybody in administration, in the faculty, all the suppliers that we have for our technology, and there is a mixed picture of how their bargaining power develops. Those who are gaining bargaining power are, first of all, the technology enablers. Because, and that goes a little bit in your question, Sigrid, how can you compete in a digitized / international / very transparent environment? How can you compete? You can compete by superior technology. At HHL, we are right now introducing a new learning management system, Canvas. Canvas is one of the big 3 systems in the world, which many fine business schools are using. And that's where the problem is. You don't differentiate yourself. So those who have the best technology enabling partner will have a competitive edge, and thus this partner becomes more powerful. And the second is superstar educators. So if you have, not to, on an international scale, I'm not so sure how glamorous the name of Professor Stephan Stubner for strategy or entrepreneurship is. So if I compare it then to Michael Porter, not saying that Michael Porter is a much better educator than myself, who knows? That's for the students to evaluate. But the superstar educators have that brand name that attracts people. So Scott Galloway from NYU, Michael Porter, rest in peace, Clayton Christensen, etc. Those are the names that are known and that draw people to you. So those superstar, let me say them, superstar brand educators, brand professors, they of course have a big bargaining power because they deliver an edge in a very transparent business school market. That market hasn't been that transparent before. Bargaining power of buyers, it's becoming a more and more fragmented market. More and more players are in there. Students are there, companies as buyers as well are in this market, and they can pick and choose from many different offerings. So of course their bargaining power goes up, specifically as there is not necessarily a clear USP anymore. If you are in a digitized environment, if you are in presence learning and you have a superior modern campus, like in Germany, for example, Frankfurt School has a multi-million investment had in their facilities. Columbia just opened their newest campus. And if you're looking for presence learning and you have superior offerings, that of course might be a USP. But what is then the USP? Is Port of Forces a USP? Not really. Network might be a USP. Brand might be a USP, but it becomes more difficult. Generally, the key takeaway is you can still build the USP, but it becomes more difficult because of this transparency and because of all of that. Switching costs for students actually become quite low, especially if you go into this modularized competency development and not so much the big programs. So, and all this leads then to rivalry in the market, and I've mentioned it already a couple of times. Rivalry is increasing. It's basically a prime example. And now let's make a move to how is our market actually developing in terms of customers. The market is flat. That's interesting. So if I'm looking at, for HHL, you have MSc students, full-time, part-time, and you have MBA students, full-time, part-time, you have PhD students. In the MSc market, we did have a competitive edge internationally because not many countries actually used to offer MScs. And in that MSc market, what we can see is that overall, it's stable in our market in terms of students who are willing to pay for the education somewhere in Europe. It's stable. Germans are moving abroad, but international, specifically Europeans, are coming to Germany, even now in the pandemic. Not so strongly anymore, but we can see this trend continuing. The part-time MC market is developing. That is a very German phenomenon because you have this dual education, duale Bildung, and many of those students actually want to put on a master's degree, but that's a developing market. Part-time MBA is a prospective market. So for people who have been in the job already for a couple of years, who are trying to get to the next level in their career in the same organization, who want to mix or combine family, career, and education. That is actually a growing market that we see in Europe. And the full-time MBA is the big, wow, I'm missing the English word, the Sorgenkind. So this is something that gives us headache. Back in 2017-18, I mentioned that when we had our first strategy process, the the forecasts were that on a global level, 10 to 20% of the MBA market will actually drop down. And that was, especially for the US business schools, this was tough. Not so much for the first and second tiers, but for the third and fourth tiers. And we've seen that many change their business models. Some just close their MBA programs because students are not there anymore. Why? Because the return on investment is not necessarily there anymore, and the move to modularized learning. Return on investment is not something that is so important for European market, because apart from some exemptions, a business school education here is quite reasonably priced. But if you go to the US, the traditional exit path for an MBA, you are hired by McKinsey or Goldman Sachs, pretty much, I wouldn't say dried out, especially the consulting companies are still hiring like crazy, but the iBanks, the PE houses, they're not there anymore, and it's not so clear anymore. If you are hired by Apple and Google and Amazon, you still can make a quite good living. But in the second tier also of the startups and grown-ups or growth companies, it's not so clear anymore. So people become more suspicious when they are faced with the decision, just let's take a $250,000 loan for a one-year education, it will repay. And that's not so clear anymore. Plus, you in the second tier and third tier, where the brand name of the school doesn't really help you, you cannot even bank that in. So it really has to be for the competency that you are getting a job. So rivalry as a market is pretty much flat, not really increasing. Also, the MBAC numbers show that. So the number of GMAT test takers, GMAT is one of the typical internationally accepted admission criteria in business schools. They say it's on average is a pretty flat market. And in that market, we have new substitutes, we have new entrants, it's getting crowded. And each and every single player that I've seen in the business school market, so all the other business schools have a growth strategy. So it is pretty interesting that you are looking at the market where the bargaining power of the buyers specifically is getting higher, of the superstar suppliers is getting higher, and the market is getting more and more crowded. Everybody wants to grow. And that typically has a negative impact on margins. And we can see that. If you look at the data that we're getting, that we are able to grasp, we see that many business schools are running a deficit from their normal operations. And almost everybody is dependent on fundraising. Yeah, I'm an admirer, dear Professor Asmus, of Amos Tuck, how they managed to stay with that size. And it's clear they have so many loyal alums who donate regularly. That is something that's not happening to that extent in Europe, at least. But we see that even the big brand names are actually in fundraising mode. Still, you pay $100,000 or euros for the education, they are looking and desperately looking for money. Okay, so what are the key takeaways from all of this? The key takeaways that we have then distilled in our own strategy process are fourfold. Number one, there will be new formats. In the business school market in the future, there are going to be new formats that become important. Meaning more digitization, more as a topic as well. So digitized value chain, digital competencies, coding, etc. Also micro degrees and certificates. Even the German institution of the so-called Hochschulrektorenkonferenz, the association of the universities in Germany, they send to their members, please think about and think fast and hard about adding to your portfolio and not only new diplomas and masters, but also those micro certificates, badges, whatever you want to name Secondly, we see that there is a higher need for individualized learning paths. So people, especially if you say we have a modularized offering in our courses, because some people just want to develop the competency for corporate valuation, some people just want to have a micro degree, I'm a certified strategy consultant, and others want to have the full play, the whole diploma or master. It might be that in the same course you get people from different backgrounds. So you need to enable them to have their very individualized learning journey, and you have to help them actually by mastering their way through the offerings that you're having, and not be afraid to integrate offerings of other institutions, edtech, startups, etc. The delivery will change. Delivery who is the driver of digitization in the world at the moment? It's the pandemic. And that also holds true for business schools. And that's a tricky thing. In February 2020, when I went to my colleagues and we discussed digitization, and that's true with all of us and all our organizations, the feedback was, yes, it's important, but difficult, and nah, it's nothing, we can't do that, and it will kill our brand, and students won't like it, and how can I develop this competency, and the technology is not there, and the bandwidth is not there. And in March 2020, all of us went online. And suddenly it worked, because it had to work. And we all prided ourselves to be one of the first and doing those online lectures, and everybody and all the business schools developed digitized syllabi and new teaching formats, and have teaching rooms and green rooms, etc., etc., etc. And while in the beginning we could brag in front of our students with that, in front of our sponsors, alums, and corporate clients, now it's the new normal. There's nothing special. I mean, there's nothing special sitting in front of a computer and lecturing and discussing to you. You have that every day, many hours. Now the question is, what's the next step? How can you, as a business school, become different and better? Is it having a better webcam? Or is it more having learning designers help you to develop syllabi that are optimized for a blended experience, or a full online experience if you want? Is it to have the IT technology and tools, not just Zoom? There are a lot of startups who are offering alternatives to Zoom and Teams now, who are more like a classroom, where the look and feel of a classroom is there, where engagement is supported. Who is using the best possibility here? Because you need to build a new competitive edge. We all are proficient with Zoom now, more or less. But now the next level is, how can I help my students to survive a day of lectures without getting an information or digital overkill? So new formats, new delivery. And teachers there will become more edutainers and coaches than lecturers in the future. Unless you are a superstar, then you can lecture and everybody will be listening to you. Brand is becoming more important, because it is so hard to develop a USP, not necessarily now, but in 5 years. Transparency is increasing, digitalization is coming more and more, everything becomes replaceable, but education becomes a commodity. The brand becomes more important. And we see that, and that combines now with a fourth topic. We see brand becomes more important, and Harvard, INSEAD, IMD, those guys have no problems. I mean, they have their own problems, but brand isn't one of their topics, visibility and power. But now others are moving and trying to understand, okay, what is the brand edge that a guy can have compared to the others? And there was a very nice article in Poets and Quants. It's one of the websites business schools deans are looking at. And of course, MBA candidates are also looking at that. And it shows that there's a fourth factor in the market that is beyond management, as we call it. You need to find a topic to help build your brand and make a USP in the market. So this Poets and Quants article, just 2 or 3 weeks ago, they asked 20 business school deans, could you tell us your priorities for the next year? Could you tell us your strategy? And you had those deans that said, okay, oh, you know what, my strategy is we have to become more student focused. We have to enable our faculty to do better teaching in this blended environment, which is here to stay. We have to improve our facilities, and for this we have to do fundraising. That's good. That's a good strategic plan. It's not a strategy, but it's a good strategic plan. But it's, you know, that's very generic. I could ask that any educational institution, not just a top business school. And then you had the few who made a very distinctive point. For example, INSEAD. The INSEAD dean said, the most important topic of today is climate. We educate the managers who will help save the world. As HHL, it will be difficult to now position ourselves as the climate guys, but that is something beyond management. 4 years ago, you could say sustainability, ESG, SDGs, etc., is something that you can build on. Now it's a given everywhere. All the top business schools say leadership, entrepreneurship. So this is not a differentiator anymore. It could be a differentiator to say, I do it differently. But that is something that's beyond management, is something that you have to look for. If I'm looking at valued competitors in the market, WHU has been doing a program with Bucerius Law School, so management and law. We have for long seen at very good state business schools, management and IT. We have seen management and public policy. And the question is, what is beyond management? Because management is an auxiliary function to help bring value to society. But we typically, as management scholars, as students of business administration, need to dock on some innovation, some technology, and that is something that business schools have to take a hard look at, and will be very difficult in the future to say, we're management, that's it. You have to find another edge here. Just because, of course, everybody else is doing it, and it makes a lot of sense. So these are the 4 factors that we see generally in the market: formats, delivery, brand, and a topic beyond management. Okay, now what does it mean for us? First of all, what we see in the overall business school market is, if you look at Germany and Europe, we see that there is a trend here to start to offer more specialized programs. HHL has a legacy of being a general management school, and that was a USP 30 years ago. Was a USP to say, we do general management. We don't think in silos. We don't think in marketing versus logistics versus finance versus strategy. We want to take a general manager's perspective, and you have to integrate these viewpoints. As in real life, if you want to become a CEO, you have to integrate these viewpoints to guide your organization, to guide the people. And interestingly, that is something that is experiencing less and less popularity in the market. In the market, in terms of students who want to study, they become more focused. Many of them want to have a finance degree or a marketing degree or whatever degree. So we see that resembled in what is happening with our competitors. They offer all of these different programs, start offering. And also everybody is experimenting with full online degrees, maybe an MA, MSc, or MBA. We see also, and then that would actually be a kind of new business model. So one is portfolio, be offering more specialized offerings, but also putting them off the market if the demand is not there anymore. So very, very entrepreneurial approach. Secondly, changing the business model, looking at how to decrease the cost of delivery, which you can do through digitization. And by that, even with comparatively low fees that you're paying, still make a very decent profit contribution. And thank you for the question that is coming up here. That is actually going, oh, Kai Peters, another expert in the round. Great to have you with us. That is something that we see, and I would call this archetypes. So in the chat, we have the question. In the US, we see the online hybrid specialization of degree and certification. And that is, I totally agree here. In terms of archetypes, and that's not totally messy to list here, what we saw was we have a couple of players who actually said we abandon our traditional business model. I think it was Boston University who dropped their normal MBA and went to a full online MBA, lowered the price to, I believe it is from close to $100,000 to $25,000, and were widely successful, getting a massive amount of students. Very, very big success. And that would be one archetype that I see on a global level. Schools that actually say, I drop my presence MBA, my presence offering, and I move to an online offering, right? And most likely we all have seen those pictures. I think Harvard has a nice one where you have this teacher in a room and you have this massive, massive array of screens where you have 100 students in there. Looks really cool. I know there is a consortium in Europe, ESMT, Copenhagen Business School. If you're Star Trek fans, they invest a 7-digit sum to develop the holodeck for education, right? I've heard, I've not experienced it myself because I was too cheap to actually buy myself in. Tony Robbins, one of the big educational speakers, invested millions in a virtual setting. Tony Robbins is a guy who fills football stadiums for his speeches, for his coaching seminars, and he's trying to replicate that in the virtual world, spending millions of euros investing here. And there are players that say this is the way ahead. Another kind of business model I see is, and it's all going in the direction of growth, specialization of degrees, I already said. So we see this in Germany, in Europe, and in the US apparently. International footprint. So we've seen the development in the past 10, 15 years, where international business schools are trying to develop a footprint in other countries, other continents as well. Let's take an European example, Lancaster University. A very fine, decent research university in the UK, who grow mainly by building campuses on different continents, one in Leipzig actually, and that is their growth strategy, and they're quite successful in doing this. And then we also have a approach where we say, but that's not the big growth part, are the local and regional champions. I would say, like in France, EdTech, very, very, very reputed in their region, visible on a European scale, but not in the relevant set of many, many students who are looking for schools on a international scale. And then finally, there's one aspect that we have, that's the traditional, let me call it the IMD model. You have one program that you have in the rankings, like the MBA. IMD in several rankings is one of the top business schools with the MBA worldwide, but it's just one program, and they make the money with loads of executive education clients that come because it's so high up in the rankings and because of it's a fine school with great offerings, but they make brand building via the rankings. And then you have these schools that are combining. One example that comes to mind here is Arizona State University. Arizona State University has been an important, very, very big player in the online and hybrid MBA market for decades already. They are now very research oriented, by the way, which is also important in that field to build your brand. And now they're internationalizing through an interesting franchise/licensing system. So they are combining internationalization, digitization, even portfolio development. They acquired a business school called Thunderbird a couple of years ago to offer even basically the same package in another brand. So there are a couple of archetypes that we see here. Now, again, what does it mean for us? And just take a quick look at the questions that were coming.
There was another question basically saying the online teaching is starting to transfer away just from online, but going into inverted classrooms. What do you think about that kind of teaching?
I'm struggling a bit, Kai, with the term inverted classroom. Could you quickly elaborate on what you mean here?
Until then, we can maybe jump to the next question. And he's saying that in terms of financing, the US is charging less now and an annual percentage of the income in the future in return for the access of lifelong courses. You were saying lifelong learning is a huge thing coming up. Yeah. So that is kind of a finance model that they are doing.
Yeah. We're all in the same boat. I strongly believe, and I mentioned it partly before, we have to change the way of teaching profoundly. Because this, basically, in the ideal world, my current belief is, as a business important in the market, you can either have the luxury of investing millions and millions in digitization and scale, or you have a smarter approach to teaching. Hopefully both, but what do I mean by smarter approach to teaching? First of all, knowledge. What is Port of Five Forces? Students will less and less be willing to pay somebody, to pay Stephan Stubner to explain them what Port of Five Forces is, because they can get it for free. There will be some website where you have curated content. Curated content means somebody looked for the best free videos, the best free articles that explain Port of Five Forces. So we have to offer that. We have to offer that most likely in an asynchronous way, meaning some form of digital possibility, may it be a pre-recorded video, a interactive webinar. Of course, there is one technology, Area 9, who is delivering the technology for adaptive learning. Cool stuff. So there should be one component where the student basically more or less at home can get that. What, Calvin, what we used to do by reading a book, right? Then, still digital, mostly, I believe it will be important to have collaborative approaches to discussing, reflecting, and applying this knowledge, to build competency. And we're not there yet. This is what we at HHL are doing at the moment. We're looking at different startups and building little pilots with them to learn more if their approach can support us and we can support them. For example, next week or so, we are publishing a collaboration with a startup called Jot, who are bringing cohort-based learning into the market. So their understanding is people, even in the digitized world, want to have a cohort, want to have their peers with which them build trust and with which them interact not only during this course or this program, but in the future. So basically a implied alumni network, an implied Rotary Club within your education. So this is one of the different approaches, and this is really trial and error at the moment. So you have to find ways in a digital world to make it more personal for competency development. And you know, we're screening the market for different approaches here. And then you have to have, I believe for us, the future, as HHL as a small business school, needs to be to actually have that presence experience. But that presence experience, again, is not Stephan Stubner standing in a lecture hall talking about Port of Five Forces, but it's really about building a network, having a very intense learning experience, but which is also very fulfilling, giving a lot of impulses, and also enabling to build those important personal networks and the emotional attachment to a certain business school. And this is what we are discussing and experimenting with in the moment. The next thing you mentioned is very interesting. Basically, a subscription, you could say, a subscription for lifelong learning. This is we've discussed this shortly. We haven't really thought it through yet. But of course, the assumption would be somebody studied with you, was more or less happy, knows what she's getting, and then for a small fee has access to new knowledge, to interaction, to different formats, which can help her in the advancement of her career and or life. And that is something very interesting, which would be fun to look deeper into, because this would combine the emotional attachment to a certain community with the willingness to actually spend, and that money is not a donation or a fee for some alumni association, but it's something that you pay for because you think the value that you're getting, meaning I need some very important input now, or maybe even I can call an expert. I have a voucher twice a year. I can call one of the topic experts at the business school because if I have a question at work, or I need a quote or something like that. So that could be something very interesting where you lower the entry barrier by asking for a lower price, and that will happen. This is what we see wherever business schools are moving into a more digitized program, where the relation between presence and online is moving towards online. We see typically also the market prices deteriorating. Bracket open. Why didn't we see price decreases in the pandemic? Because the organizations are built for presence learning and now have to do online learning. So the cost structure is still the same, right? So if you move into online learning, you of course have to change your cost structure to be able to lower the price as well, unless you have unlimited funds, of course. And then I believe it could become a very valid approach here by changing the payment structure, but in the end increasing the customer lifetime value.
We've got a couple more questions, but first we've got the answer to the inverted classroom. The inverted classroom means the interaction now is constant, even outside of the classroom, through social digital tools. For example, students are being asked questions and answer them themselves collectively. And the instructor now is more like a moderator, checking the discussions and the answers collectively. And group projects are visible for everyone at any time, and comments across the group. So you've basically got access to everything constantly, in and outside of the classroom.
Yeah, very good point. Very personally, I haven't found the right tool yet. The first part of the inverted classroom, this constant interaction, not so much the group projects, but I used Slack, Teams, forums in the old days, and it appears there are always the same 2 or 3 students that are asking questions, or you run into a class setting where everybody is discussing and they expect you to answer and moderate. And then it might become too overwhelming, and we had that experience as well, that you need to put much more effort into managing that group and the interaction, because if you offer the possibility, they of course expect that you then follow through with. So I haven't found personally the right approach. I'm very grateful for any hints and answers. But this moderation approach is pretty much, I mean, this is old school case study teaching, at least as when I was in the US some years ago and did my courses there. My teacher was a moderator. He never gave the answers. He just moderated. What do you think? What's your perspective? And in a very Socratesian way, asking the right questions. And you were forced to really think. And that is something that helps in the reflection and in the learning experience. Absolutely. But it is something that we have to teach our teachers. And pedagogical education is not necessarily in all regions of the world part of becoming a professor.
Thank you. We've got another question on tutoring models. Do you think we can revive the old Oxford-Cambridge tutoring model, but in the online mode? Do you think that's possible?
Yes, absolutely. And the question is, who's the tutor? And then for a business school, who has to look at a P&L, what's the cost implication? So, for example, let's say at HHL, we have a course, there are 50 students in there. And we would say it's a more or less online course. We put 100 students in there because who cares? I mean, they're sitting at home in front of the computers, so we don't have to put them in a classroom. But of course, if you do that, you have to engage tutors, for example, because they rightfully expect a personal, let's say, mentoring. They expect a personal support. And in a group of 100, it's not possible the way it is, as it is in a group of 50 or 25 or 15. So you have to add more people to actually provide the possibility. Now, the question is, who are these tutors? And tutors could be TAs, teaching assistants, could be students who have, who are eligible to that because they're senior students, or, and that is the approach that Jot is taking, the startup I talked about, it's your group themselves. Your tutor, you are the ones tutoring yourself. You get, as part of your education, you get a mini coaching, mini tutoring course, because you in your interaction support yourself. And that is a model that works in other settings very well. For example, in an organization called the Entrepreneurs Organization, which is a connection allegedly started by Michael Dell 25 years ago, where if you're looking at the German startup scene, a lot of the German startup entrepreneurs meet in EO, and the key format of them is a monthly meeting in a group of people who are randomly assigned, but they stay together, they build trust, and then they tutor themselves. And there is a very strict format to do that, and it's very successful. And they value it. They pay a lot of money to be allowed to meet with this group of people. And that is a question, who's going to be the tutor?
Pam's got a lot of really good questions on the topic of integrity. And here we go. Aside of helping our future business leaders to build the knowledge and skills they'll need for the future, where does developing academic or in general integrity fit in? How should the business school of the future deal with plagiarism without losing their consumer-centric focus? Pam is saying she's imagining that it's been never easier than now for students to plagiarize or professors to catch them, but that's the reaction of the school when it happens. So how would you be approaching that topic?
And is it even relevant anymore, honestly?
Hi, Pam. So first of all, we have to admit to ourselves that not everybody is familiar with the concept of plagiarism being something bad. I see it with my kids in preschool. What do they get as an information? There is the assignment, Google and find the answers. So, I mean, you get that recommendation for 12 straight years in school. Now you come to university and suddenly that's something bad. And we have to make sure that we don't expect something which we didn't explain before, because I believe it's not a given. First of all, what is integrity, right? But let's first answer the easy question, plagiarism. So we have to make sure that everybody understands what is plagiarism and why we don't like it. And second of all, we have to follow through. So I'm pretty, in my courses or whenever I get that information, I of course look at the circumstances. Was it likely that that person actually knew what she or he was doing? Did they understand the gravity of what he or she was doing? And in some cases, honestly, I have to say, come on, you can't do that. You fail, of course, you fail the grade, but we don't kick you from school because I understand the context. If I have the feeling that that person quite surely understands what he or she was doing, then I'm also pretty strict. I mean, you fail the course, and at HHL we have an honor code committee, and it goes directly there without question, without discussion, because that is it's not only trying to cheat on the system, but it's cheating on your peers, and you're trying to get an unfair advantage compared to your peers. And that is nothing that, at least at HHL or at any decent business school that I know, should be accepted or is accepted. As said, but I have to understand the context. Integrity is a big word. What is integrity? In my personal perspective, I believe I don't want to tell anybody how she or he should be living. I think that's impossible, and why should my belief and my life be a role model for anybody else? But I want people to understand a couple of ground rules. Ground rule: respect. Trying to understand why the other side is behaving in a certain way or saying certain things. Ground rule is to be polite as much as possible. And ground rule is, and here I take the German word, to have Haltung. So I would expect somebody who wants to become a future leader to, if she or he has an opinion, to actually stay with that opinion and not to dodge, right? Of course, there are situations where that is very difficult to do when it becomes life-threatening. Then maybe you should dodge and run as fast as possible. But most situations that we encounter in life are not life-threatening or threatening my family, my health. That is, sorry, I would have to say integrity goes down the road because I want to protect my family. But in most other situations, I would say standing to your word. We have at HHL in our logo, you can see up here, the honorable merchant. In German, a very famous term, the ehrbare Kaufmann, where you made a handshake agreement and you stuck with the handshake agreement. No US lawyer, 150 pages contract for buying a car, but you have a handshake, word of honor, and you stay through with the word of honor. And as I said, integrity is very difficult to define and to explain, but my perspective would be try to understand who yourself are, what is your value system. And at HHL and in most business schools, we try to help you to find that answer, or to actually ask yourself the question for the first time maybe in your life, to try to understand who am I and who do I want to be and what do I aspire in life, and then try to help the students to develop the path towards this life. And I'm specifically saying life and not career, but because career is just a side effect of life. But it's difficult because you have those young hotshots who just want to go to a kick-ass consulting firm and get their gold card from Lufthansa, and they hopefully we can instill some grains in there, which 5 years later will blossom. And sometimes you get that these students who come to me and say, I don't care about grades, I care about the learning experience. Great. Did they graduate honors? No, they didn't graduate honors, but they make a decent living, that they're making a decent life. They're happy. And then that is much more important than following a preset rule of this is how you have to live. So this is a very blurry answer. I am aware of that, but the topic is very blurry.
Pam, are you happy with the answer?
I'm happy with that answer.
Oh, that was your question, Pam. Okay.
Perfect.
It was.
I want to be conscious of time, so I'm going to go through the last question that we've got here. It's a bit more of a longer one. Stefan, kind of wrapping it up maybe quite well. You were speaking about MOOC, and now looking at that again and seeing that all popular business schools and universities like Boston are offering online MBAs. Wrapping it all up, what do you think are the challenges for traditional business schools that they are facing now, and how does it impact the learning experience for our students? Someone is asking if you want to just elaborate on that, and then I think, yeah.
Please let me combine that with your question that you asked before. Where's the way ahead for HHL? And I believe the way ahead needs to be, and of course I would need 5 hours to explain the full context of that. but generally with the premise that we want to remain as we are in terms of a rather personal business school, where we try to build more of a family community. And you know, in family there happen good and bad things, of course, but we try to build a community, and we want to keep doing that. I believe the way forward for us and for many others will be really in two buzzwords: modularization of our learning, in terms of individualized learning journeys, and we're talking not next year, this is taking longer, in terms of really having the possibility to do long courses, short courses, because this will cater to so many different target groups, to students, to individuals who just want to develop competencies, to organizations, companies as well. This is what we discuss with companies in executive education very frequently. And then, of course, in the direction of digitization. All the business schools are on a growth path, as well as HHL. And for us, I believe, building on the competencies and the experiences that we have made in the past 2 years, we really need to refine and optimize our approach to blended teaching, or as Kai Peters said, the inverted classroom. We have to really work on building the competencies and improving the competencies. We get great feedbacks on our courses. So when I say building competent faculty, they're great, but 5 years, 10 years from now, we all have to build new competencies. And the key challenges, so modularization and digitization, and the key challenges that we're experiencing at the moment is, first of all, we are in the beginning of this development. So there is nobody really knows what will be the great technology, what will be the best approach. And with that comes the second challenge, that is really the investment need. The investment need that you have, because if you don't know what's the right path, you're running into a trial and error process, and it might that you have 3 fails before you find the real approach. So you have to be willing and endure that that you have sunk costs in your capex and opex. And the third part is the challenge that every organization has: change management. All this, what we see in the market, what we see with our competitors, implies a tremendous need for transformation of business schools. And if there's one thing that people don't want, even if they say they will, nobody really wants to change. I mean, it's I have my processes, procedures, routines, and they work fine. Why should I change? And why should I change? You should change first. And that's the typical problem or challenge, let me say, that every organization has when you see something where you have to move towards but you want the others to start first, and then you follow them. And that is, I think, something that happens in many organizations as well as in business schools, of course.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for letting us pick your brains tonight. It was hugely interesting. And as you can see, there were so many comments and questions, and I think we could go on for hours elaborating. A big round of virtual applause to you. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in tonight and for joining us. I hope you took one or the other thing away, and you're going to maybe learn something for the future. And yeah, thanks again, Stephan, for a very interesting evening, inspiring.
I thank everybody for sticking with us so long. Hope there were some new impulses. Thanks for joining. Reach out if you want to. I'm happy to continue a discussion in another format.
Thank you, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your evening.